Snow fell so softly, it seemed a shame to land on such a cruel place. The town square, half buried in white, stood ringed by faces red from cold and whiskey, their breath clouds twisting in the morning air. In the center, on a wooden crate slick with frost, stood a young woman no older than 20. Her cotton dress clung wetly to her frame, and her bare feet had turned the color of the snow beneath them. Gray-blue, almost translucent. A sign hung crookedly from a post beside her. Sold, too weak for labor. No one remembered her name anymore. The men had started calling her the girl, as if that made her less human, easier to discard. She kept her eyes down, lashes trembling under melting flakes. The world around her blurred between white and noise, the auctioneer's drawl, boots crunching, laughter slicing through the air like whipcord. "Can't even lift a sack of grain," a man jeered. "What good's she for?" "Maybe for looking at," another spat, and the crowd broke into cruel chuckles. The auctioneer, a bloated man with a red scarf and a voice that rasped like a shovel scraping dirt, banged his gavel. "Come on now, folks. Somebody take pity on the little thing. $5 for the girl? 4? She's no trouble, just needs feed in." No one spoke. She stood motionless, a pale figure in the storm. The snow had begun to gather on her hair, a faint crown over defeat. A wagon creaked by, wheels splintering ice. The blacksmith's wife shook her head, whispering to her friend. "She's cursed, I heard. Can't keep work, can't keep breath." The girl, Evelyn, had long stopped defending herself. Shame had hollowed her out until she was lighter than the falling snow. She wanted the ground to take her, quietly. A single voice broke the silence. "I'll give 3. Every head turned. He stood at the edge of the square, tall enough to blot the sun where it strained through the gray clouds. His hair was white as the frost clinging to his shoulders, his skin the color of earth warmed by fire. Bare chest beneath a fur-lined hide cloak, he looked carved from another world, older, calmer, a ghost of some ancient storm. The townsfolk stiffened. "An Apache." The auctioneer cleared his throat, unsure if he should even acknowledge the bid. $3? "Sir, that's a bit low." The man stepped forward. "She's worth that much to breathe." His voice was quiet, deep enough to carry through the falling snow. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. "He's crazy. What's he want with her? Ain't right, Takin our kind." Evelyn didn't lift her head. The words struck her like stones, but they were familiar. Pain had become a kind of language she understood. The auctioneer rubbed his gloved hands together. 3 it is then, sold to the Indian name of Talon, he said, and dropped a small pouch of silver coins at the man's boots. The weight of them silenced any protest. Talon walked toward her through the swirling snow. Every step was deliberate, slow, the kind of movement that made space bend around it. When he reached her, he didn't look at the crowd or the sign or even the auctioneer. He looked at her, really looked, and for the first time that morning, Evelyn felt seen, not measured. He reached up, fingers rough but gentle, and untied the rope that bound her wrists. The coarse fibers had bitten deep into her skin. He brushed the red marks with his thumb, as if wiping them away. She flinched, expecting pain. None came. "You'll walk again when you're warm," he said softly, almost to himself. Then, before she could protest or understand, he lifted her from the crate. A hush fell. His arms were massive, the muscles coiling beneath his bronze skin. The snow stuck to his shoulders, melting as it touched the heat of his body. Evelyn's head rested against his chest. She could hear the slow, steady rhythm of his heart. Someone spat. "Ain't right, lettin' him take her." Another muttered, "He'll eat her alive by morning." Talon ignored them. He looked once toward the white hills, where the trail vanished into the storm, then turned his back on the town. The crowd parted, muttering, resentful. The sound of his boots in the snow was heavy and certain. Evelyn tried to speak, her voice a faint tremor. Why did you?" "Quiet," he murmured. "Save your strength." They passed the edge of the square, where the last buildings ended and the prairie began. The snow deepened, swallowing their tracks almost as soon as they were made. He moved with an easy grace, his breath steady. She could feel the warmth of him through the thin fabric of her dress, could smell the faint scent of wood smoke and sage that clung to him. Behind them, the auctioneer called after him. "She's yours now. Don't bring her back." But the words scattered into the wind like dry leaves. Evelyn let her eyes close. The rhythm of his steps became a strange comfort, like a lullaby she didn't deserve. Her body was weightless, her mind a whirl of disbelief. She was being carried, not dragged. No hands pulling, no fists, no cold floor beneath her knees. The trail curved toward the foothills, where pines bent under the snow. A hawk cried somewhere above. Talon's breath misted the air in slow clouds. She studied his face when the wind shifted, lined with years, eyes dark but soft, every part of him carved by survival. He noticed her watching. "You're afraid," he said, not as a question. She swallowed. "You shouldn't have bought me." He walked a little farther before answering. "No one should be for sale." The words sank into her like warmth after frostbite, painful first, then unbearably human. They reached a clearing where two horses waited under a pine tree. He placed her on one, steadying her with a hand at her waist. The simple touch was both terrifying and tender. "You can ride?" he asked. I used to," she whispered. He nodded, adjusting the reins in her frozen fingers. "Then remember." The horses began to move, their hooves muffled by the snow. Silence stretched between them, thick and strange. She wanted to thank him but couldn't find the words. Gratitude felt too fragile for the world they lived in. By the time they reached the ridge, the town below had vanished into mist. The wind carried faint echoes of laughter, gunfire, the clang of iron, sounds of a life she no longer belonged to. Ahead lay only white hills and pines like sentinels. Talon dismounted, walking beside her horse as the trail narrowed. The snow deepened around his boots, but he didn't slow. His breath came steady, his gaze fixed ahead, as if the cold could not touch him. At the crest, Evelyn glanced back one last time. The world she'd known was gone, erased by snow. A tear slipped from her eye before she could stop it, freezing against her cheek. He saw. "You mourn them," he said quietly. "They never mourn me," she answered. For the first time, a faint smile flickered across his face. Quick, sad, gone as soon as it came. "Then let the snow bury them." They descended into the valley, where the wind softened and the sky blushed faintly with dusk. Evelyn's body ached, but something in her heart began to loosen. A fragile thread uncoiling after years of being tied too tight. She wasn't free, not yet, but she was no longer a thing to be bought. When they finally stopped at the edge of a frozen stream, Talon looked toward the distant trees. Smoke rose faintly from somewhere beyond. A cabin, she thought, though she couldn't yet see it. "Rest," he said, his voice low, kind in a way she hadn't heard in years. "We'll go home when the wind sleeps." Evelyn gazed at him through the blur of snow. The word home caught in her chest like a spark. She didn't know what it meant anymore. As night settled, the world turned blue and silent. Talon crouched beside the stream, cupping water in his hands, his reflection trembling beneath the surface. Evelyn watched him, wondering what kind of man would rescue a stranger the world had already condemned. The snow fell heavier. He turned his head toward her and said quietly, "The storm will hide us tonight." For the first time, she believed him. She looked back toward the endless white, where the town had been, and realized she could no longer see it. Only the sound of the wind remained, soft, merciful and new. Snow whispered against the walls of the small cabin, soft as breath. Evelyn sat by the fire wrapped in a fur blanket that still carried the scent of pine and smoke. Her fingers trembled as she held the tin cup Talon had given her, the broth inside steaming faintly. Outside, the wind moved through the pines with a low, mournful hum, but here the air was warm, thick with the quiet presence of the man who had carried her out of the world. He worked without sound, his movements steady and deliberate. He hung wet hides near the hearth to dry, stacked wood by the door, and stirred the pot that simmered slowly over the flames. The light carved shadows across his face, lines of endurance, a quiet history written on his skin. Evelyn studied him from the corner of her eye, unsure whether to fear or trust him. Her throat ached when she spoke. You didn't have to buy me. He didn't look up. You weren't for sale. The words confused her. They sounded simple, but something inside them cut deep. She wanted to ask what he meant, but her courage failed. The world she knew had always been one of exchange. Women traded for work, safety, silence. He ladled more broth into her cup. Eat, he said. You need strength. She obeyed, though the food made her stomach twist. Her body wasn't used to kindness. The warmth spread slowly through her, waking a hunger she'd forgotten she had. When she looked up again, Talon was kneeling by the fire, mending the strap of a snowshoe. The flames lit the white strands of his hair, turning them gold for a heartbeat. He looked older than she first thought, but strong in a way that made age seem like armor, not weakness. When she tried to stand, her legs buckled. He was there before she fell, steadying her with a hand on her elbow. His touch was careful, the way a man might hold a wounded animal. I can work, she murmured, embarrassed. I can clean or mend something. You'll rest, he said simply, and guided her back to the stool. She bit her lip. She wasn't used to being told to rest. Even gentleness felt like another form of control. But when she looked up at him, she saw no hardness in his face, only patience, the kind that didn't need to prove itself. The day passed in slow rhythm. He spoke little, and when he did, his words carried weight, as though everyone had been tested before being released. She learned that his name was Talon Greyhawk, that the cabin had been his for years, and that the valley beyond the ridge belonged to no one but the snow and the wind. As dusk deepened, Evelyn noticed a carving on the mantel, a wooden figurine of a woman with a child in her arms. The lines were worn smooth by time. She traced it with her gaze, then asked softly, "Your wife?" He didn't answer for a long time. Then, in a voice roughened by distance, he said, "Once." She lowered her eyes, ashamed for asking. The silence that followed wasn't angry. It was simply heavy, like the snow pressing down on the roof. When the fire burned low, she found herself listening to the sound of his breathing, steady and real. It had been years since she'd shared a room with someone who made her feel safe. Still, safety itself was frightening. It made her aware of everything she'd lost. She woke in the middle of the night to find him sitting on the floor beside the hearth, sharpening a knife by lamplight. His profile was calm, not threatening. The motion of the blade against the stone had a rhythm, almost like a lullaby. "You don't sleep," she whispered. He didn't glance at her. "The storm's not done yet." When she shifted under the blanket, the floor creaked, and for a brief moment, his eyes met hers. There was something unspoken there, a mixture of wariness and understanding. She realized then that he, too, had learned to survive by silence. The next morning, she rose early and tried to sweep the floor. Her limbs trembled, but she refused to stop. The cabin needed it, she needed it. Work was the only language she knew for gratitude. When she finished, Talon looked at her, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "The place remembers a woman's hands," he said. His words startled her. It had been so long since anyone noticed her efforts, much less named them as good. Later, as snow began to fall again, she watched him outside chopping wood. Each swing of the axe sent powder flying into the air, glinting like crushed stars. He worked bare-chested despite the cold, the muscles in his back flexing under the pale light. There was no vanity in it, only necessity. Yet something stirred in her, an ache that wasn't fear or desire but something deeper, unnamed. By evening, the storm thickened. The wind moaned through the cracks in the logs. Talon returned with his arms full of kindling, his hair damp, his skin flushed from the cold. Evelyn handed him a dry cloth. Their fingers brushed. Just a moment, just enough to make her heart stumble. "You shouldn't be out there long," she said quietly. He looked at her with an expression she couldn't read. "I've lived longer in storms than most men live in peace." The firelight flickered between them. For a breath, it felt like the world beyond the walls didn't exist. But that illusion broke when distant voices carried through the wind. Men shouting faintly, laughter twisted by the storm. Evelyn froze. Talon's head lifted, listening. His hand went to the knife on the table. "Riders," he muttered. "From town." Her pulse quickened. "They'll come here." He didn't answer, only moved to the window and peered out through the frost. The glow of torches flickered faintly between the trees, far off but moving closer. He turned to her. "Stay quiet." She obeyed, pressing herself near the fire, her hands clutching the blanket. The fear was sharp, familiar, men coming, voices rising. The past rushed back like smoke choking the air. But this time there was something new. She wasn't alone. Talon waited by the door, motionless as stone. The sound faded after a while. The riders must have turned back, their laughter swallowed by the wind. Only when the silence returned did he exhale and set the knife down. "They'll come again," she whispered. "Yes," he said. "Men like that always do." He poured her another cup of broth, as if nothing had happened. She took it with trembling hands. The fire popped softly. Outside, the storm eased. Inside, something between them had shifted. Not love yet, but a fragile recognition that the other carried wounds the world could not see. She spoke before she could stop herself. "Why did you really buy me?" He stared into the flames for a long time. The answer, when it came, was quiet and sure. "Because no one should freeze in front of men who feel nothing." The words struck her like warmth breaking through ice. She turned away, tears burning her eyes. He rose and opened the door. Cold air poured in, and she watched as he stepped shirtless into the snow, gathering more wood in the dim light. His white hair shimmered under the moon, the wind catching it like smoke. For a moment, she thought he looked less like a man and more like a spirit, one who had chosen, for reasons she couldn't yet understand, to save her. And as the door closed behind him, the cabin seemed to hold its breath, waiting for whatever would come next. The snow had thinned by morning, leaving a world washed in quiet silver. Evelyn stood at the cabin door, her breath clouding as she looked out across the valley. The sky was pale, the kind of blue that carried no warmth. She could see the faint trail of hoofprints from the night before, where the riders had passed, proof that the world beyond still remembered her, and not kindly. Behind her, Talon stirred the fire, his movements slow, precise. The cabin smelled of coffee and smoke. He was sharpening an old axe, the scrape of metal steady as a heartbeat. She envied that steadiness. She hadn't known peace since before she could remember. "Do they know we're here?" she asked quietly. "They'll know," he said. "The hills talk." His calm unsettled her. How could a man live without fear when fear was all she'd ever known? She stepped outside to fetch water from the barrel, her boots crunching through thin frost. The air bit her skin, but she welcomed the sting. It reminded her she was alive. A hawk circled high above, its cry piercing the silence. Somewhere far off, a hammer struck an anvil, town life going on without her. When she came back in, Talon was at the window, watching the horizon. He said nothing, but she saw the flicker in his eyes, something wary, protective. By midday, the first sound of hooves reached them. 2 riders. She froze, water sloshing from the pail. Talon set down his axe, wiped his hands, and opened the door before they could knock. The sheriff and a preacher. Their coats were heavy with frost, their horses steaming. The preacher's face was thin, self-righteous. The sheriff's, hard with the kind of power that had never been questioned. "Afternoon," the sheriff said, his voice carrying more authority than warmth. "We heard tell there's a white woman up here, stayin' with you." Talon's reply came steady. "You heard right." The preacher frowned. "That's a serious matter, son. Folks in town are worried. A girl like her, living alone with a man like you, it invites talk." Evelyn stood by the hearth, the heat stifling now. Her pulse roared in her ears. She wanted to vanish into the floor. "She ain't a prisoner," Talon said evenly. The sheriff's gaze swept the cabin. "Maybe not. But the good people of this town care about appearances." Evelyn flinched. Appearances. That was all her life had ever been. How she looked to others, never who she was. The preacher stepped forward, his tone falsely gentle. "Child, are you here of your own will?" She hesitated. The room felt smaller, every breath scraping her throat. Talon didn't move, didn't look at her. He trusted her to speak, and that trust gave her courage. "Yes," she said softly. He saved me from the cold. The preacher blinked, as if she'd spoken blasphemy. Saved you? You call being here salvation? She straightened, trembling but firm. I was dying in that square. No one else lifted a hand. The sheriff's jaw tightened. We'll be watchin'. People don't take kindly to this kind of arrangement. Talon's eyes were calm, unreadable. Let them watch. They left soon after, their horses vanishing into the white glare. The silence that followed felt heavy as stone. Evelyn sank into the chair, covering her face. Shame burned in her chest, shame she couldn't explain. Not for him, but for herself, for how easily she'd let their scorn pierce her. They looked at me like I'd sinned, she whispered. They don't see, Talon said. They only measure. His voice carried no anger, only truth. But it made her cry harder. I don't know who I am anymore, she said. Not the girl they sold, not the woman they hate. He crouched beside her, his large hands resting on his knees. You are what the fire makes of you. She met his gaze. And what did it make of you? His eyes flickered toward the window, where the smoke curled upward into the gray sky. Ashes first, he said. Then something that could still walk. The simplicity of it struck her deeper than any sermon. That night, she dreamed of her old life, the noise, the cold stares, the emptiness. When she woke, she found a fur draped over her shoulders, tucked gently as one might cover a child. Talon sat by the fire again, repairing a broken piece of leather. Do you ever sleep? She murmured. When there's peace, he said. There isn't yet. Outside, a coyote cried, lonely and sharp. She listened, realizing the sound no longer frightened her. Over the next days, she worked beside him. She cleaned, mended, cooked, and for the first time, the tasks felt like creation, not punishment. He showed her how to split kindling, how to find dry moss for fire. When she laughed at her own clumsiness, he didn't smile, but the corner of his mouth twitched, and that was enough. One afternoon, she found him sitting on the porch, carving wood with quiet patience. It was another figurine, a woman's shape forming under his knife. She watched in silence until he stopped and held it to the light. She was yours, Evelyn said softly. The woman you lost. He nodded. She died when the fever came. My child too. Her heart tightened. I'm sorry. There's no need, he said. The snow remembers everything. I only carve so it doesn't forget their faces. She reached out, hesitant, touching the smooth wood. You still love them. I still live because of them, he replied. Something in her chest cracked then, not from sorrow, but from the fragile understanding that grief could be gentler than hate. That evening, she braided his hair by the fire. He sat still, letting her hands move through the white strands. The gesture felt sacred, though neither spoke of it. Your people will judge me too, she said quietly. He nodded. Some already do. But what they call shame is only fear given a voice. When she finished, he turned slightly toward her, and for a heartbeat, their eyes met. The firelight caught in them, his dark, hers pale, and in that reflection, she saw something unspoken bloom. Not ownership. Not charity. Recognition. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft and endless. The wind sighed through the pines, brushing against the cabin walls like a memory that refused to die. Later, as she lay on her cot, she thought of the sheriff's eyes, the preacher's words, the world waiting to strip them of dignity. But then she remembered Talon's voice. You are what the fire makes of you. She turned toward the flames, watching them dance, each flicker a breath of life refusing to go out. For the first time in years, she didn't feel small. Talon moved quietly across the room, placing another log on the fire. His shadow loomed large on the wall, a steady shape against the storm. She whispered, almost to herself, They'll come again. He paused, the firelight glinting against the knife at his belt. Then we'll see what they really fear. The wood cracked, a spark leaping high, and for an instant, their faces were bathed in gold. Two souls no longer afraid of being seen. Outside, the snow deepened. Inside, something unseen but certain had taken root, growing warm beneath the silence. Night pressed down like a held breath. The storm had returned, wilder than before, flinging snow against the cabin in thick, frantic sheets. The fire in the hearth burned low, a single heartbeat of orange amid a world gone white. Evelyn sat close to it, hands clasped, listening to the wind moan through the chinks in the walls. Talon moved in the shadows, checking the shutters, the latch, the rifles propped near the door. He said nothing, but his silence had weight. It was the sound of a man who had lived through worse nights than this. She sensed it before he did. The faint echo of hooves, the cruel laughter carried through the storm. Her pulse quickened. She rose, clutching her shawl tighter. "They've come," she whispered. Talon looked toward the sound, eyes narrowing. He reached for his coat, the heavy fur one she'd mended, but didn't put it on. Instead, he opened the door and stepped out shirtless into the freezing dark, his white hair whipping like smoke in the wind. Evelyn followed to the threshold, her breath catching as she saw torches cutting through the snow. 5 men, maybe 6, their voices loud with drink and malice. "Thought we'd see if the Indian still kept his pretty prize," one shouted, the firelight catching the edge of his grin. Talon stood silent, a wall of stillness against their noise. The snow gathered on his shoulders, on his hair, glimmering in the torchlight. "Turn back," he said, his voice even. "There's nothing here for you." Laughter answered him. Nothing but her. Evelyn felt the air leave her lungs. Shame and fury tangled in her chest, burning through her fear. These were the same faces from the square, the ones who'd watched her shiver and called her weak. Now they'd come to take her back, not because they wanted her, but because they couldn't bear to see her alive in peace. The first man dismounted, stumbling forward. "You think she belongs to you?" he slurred. "You think we'll let you soil one of ours?" Talon didn't move. "You let her die once," he said. "You don't get to claim her now." The man spat into the snow. "We'll see about that." He raised his rifle. Evelyn ran outside before she could think. The cold knife through her dress, the snow biting her bare feet. She placed herself between them, her voice breaking as she shouted. "He's the only man who never hurt me." For a heartbeat, no one moved. The wind screamed across the valley. The torches flickered, casting wild shadows over their faces. Her words hung there, raw, defiant, undeniable. "Step aside, girl," one of them said. "You don't know what you're saying." "I know," she said, her voice steady now. "And I'm not going back." The storm surged, snow swirling between them like smoke from an unseen fire. One of the horses reared, panicked, hooves thrashing against the air. The torchbearer stumbled, his light falling into the drift. The flame hissed out. Talon moved then, fast, silent. He stepped forward, placing himself beside her. "Go home," he said, and though he didn't raise his voice, something in it cut through the storm. "The snow doesn't care for blood, but it will take it if you force its hand." The men hesitated, their bravado cracking under the weight of that calm. The storm thickened, burying their tracks even as they stood there. Finally, the sheriff's deputy, the youngest, turned his horse. "He's not worth it," he muttered. One by one, they followed, curses drowned in the howl of wind. Their torches vanished into the white. Evelyn stood trembling, her breath ragged. The storm swallowed the last of their sound, until only the wind remained. Talon looked at her, snow melting across his chest, steam rising from his skin. "You shouldn't have come out," he said softly. "I had to," she whispered. "They weren't just here for me. They were here for your peace." He stared at her for a long moment, and something unspoken passed between them, a recognition of shared exile. He touched her shoulder gently. "Come inside." They stepped back into the cabin. The door shut behind them, muting the storm to a dull, distant roar. The fire had dimmed to embers. Evelyn knelt and fed it a log, watching as the flames rose again, painting the room in gold. Her hands shook, but not from cold. She could still feel the echo of his presence beside her, the heat that clung to him like the memory of the sun. "You were brave," he said quietly. She shook her head. "No. I was just tired of being afraid." He sat across from her, the light catching the scars along his arms. "Fear doesn't die," he said. It just learns to bow to something greater. What's greater than fear? She asked. He looked at her for a long time. Love, he said simply. The word hung in the air, fragile as snowflakes that never touched the ground. She didn't answer, couldn't. Her throat tightened, tears rising before she could stop them. He reached out, brushing one from her cheek with his thumb. The gesture was careful, reverent. Outside, the wind began to ease. The sound shifted from fury to whisper, as though the world itself exhaled. Evelyn leaned closer to the fire, the warmth washing her face. Her heart beat so loud she thought he must hear it. "Why did you save me really?" she asked. "You could have left me there." Talon's eyes softened. "Because the snow remembers the ones it covers. And I was tired of watching it bury the living." She pressed a hand to her mouth, emotion breaking free. The years of cruelty, silence, and shame fell from her shoulders like melting frost. She reached for his hand. Not out of weakness, but gratitude so deep it felt like prayer. He didn't pull away. His hand was rough, warm, grounding. She looked at the fire between them, its light flickering over both their faces. The scarred, the weary, the human. "You're perfect for my arms," he said then, his voice a whisper so low it felt born from the flame itself. Her eyes met his, and for the first time, she didn't look away. The words didn't feel like possession. They felt like belonging. She moved closer, resting her forehead against his chest. His heartbeat was slow, steady, like the earth beneath thawing snow. He wrapped the blanket around them both, the firelight painting their shadows across the wall. Two shapes merged by warmth and will. Outside, dawn began to bleed through the storm. The light turned the snow soft pink, then gold. Smoke curled from the chimney into the morning air. For a long time, they sat without speaking, the fire murmuring between them. The world beyond their door would not forget them. The gossip, the judgment, would come again. But the fear was gone. In its place lived something quiet and unbreakable. Evelyn lifted her face to him. "What happens now?" Talon smiled faintly, his eyes on the rising sun. "Now," he said, "we build the kind of life they'll never understand." The wind outside stilled completely. Inside, the fire burned bright, its reflection flickering in her eyes. Proof that even in the coldest land, warmth could be chosen, again and again. And as the first light touched her face, the old pain in her heart gave way to something new. Not freedom exactly, but peace earned by love that refused to die beneath the snow.